things that interest the community. This is Heart Health Month, and we're going to talk about heart disease and how anxiety affects the heart. My name is Douglas Graham. I'm a retired physician. I worked in the western suburbs for 30 years and then spent 2 years in the congressman's office. It was an amazing and enlightening experience. It's got me interested in public health. And so we're going to be here today to try and answers as best I can. Dr. Mason, can you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Doug, for this opportunity, and thank the Congressman and Nikki for putting it together. And I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues, Joe Harrington and whomever else may be joining us. My name is Terry Mason. I am a retired urologist, and I've been doing some other things. I've run a couple of health departments, like the Chicago Department of Public Health and the Cook County Department of Public Health. So I've had an opportunity to see it both at the level of a patient as well as a level at a municipality. And I was blessed by those opportunities to really begin to get a better understanding of what it meant to talk about and do community health as well as population health. So I'm grateful for those opportunities. We'll probably get into some of the meat of that during the course of this conversation. So thank you.
Mr. Harrington.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Congressman Davis and Nikki, for providing this platform. I've had a pretty diverse career. I did a little bit of a lot of things, and some I did a lot of. Actually, early in my career, I worked in mental health. I worked at Community Mental Health Center in North Lawndale for 2.5 years, and did some work in education. When I got my degree, I managed the kindergarten through third grade at what was then St. Francis Cabrini School in North Lawndale. I actually got a job in 1980 at the City of Chicago Department of Public Health, and worked there for 10 years, created a chronic disease program for the city and became director of chronic disease. Then left there, worked at 3 different hospitals. The first was the University of Illinois, left there, went to Mount Sinai. I was a practice manager at the University of Illinois. I started as a practice manager at Mount Sinai, but also for a brief time served as the administrative director of pediatrics and managed their satellite clinics. Left there in 1996, went to the Rush, worked at Rush for 10 years in the Department of Preventive Medicine, did a lot of research, oversaw the Clinical Research Center, and got involved in a lot of major studies, and left there in 2006 to join Dr. Mason at the City of Chicago Department of Public Health as an assistant commissioner. Initially, I was the assistant commissioner for chronic disease, then became, when he left, the assistant commissioner for community engagement. Left, went to the state health department, was there for about 5.5, 6 years. There, I was a regional health officer for Cook County and also served as an administrative law judge. So you can see it's pretty diverse. Back to you, Doug.
Okay, Representative Davis, do you have something that you wish to say tonight?
Well, I think all of you have had tremendous experiences in healthcare delivery, healthcare planning, healthcare prevention. And I think it all makes for a healthy discussion, because I'm hoping that we continue to have public health. And I don't say that in jest. I say it in a very real kind of way. And I'm wondering how our country is going to do with healthcare as we are confronted with individuals who want to change the way we operate. It seems to me that this whole concept of democracy, in terms of everybody having an opportunity to help decide what goes on, there seemed to be some effort to limit that. and that is to create a different environment, an environment that borders upon dictatorship or borders upon the presence of emperors and emperors like individuals making decisions and having a chief health officer whose notions and ideas are very different from those that many of us have been taught and believe in. And so it's creating a great deal of anxiety. And I wonder if anxiety has anything to do with health and how do you handle anxiety? And yes, it's heart month, but I'm just wondering how we're going to fare. Of course, I want to just mention some of you probably knew Dr. Larry Mitchell, who for years and years and years in the Roseland community did emergency medical services at Roseland Hospital, but was much more than that, but was a real community leader in the Roseland community as it related to health, and organized a group of physicians after the earthquake in Haiti and took them over and they provided services. So he passed away. All of us will go that way at some point. But I just wanted to mention his life and his legacy as we get started. And I also want to mention that my health policy guy, Dr. Caleb Gilchrist, uh, is hospitalized right now.
No.
And Caleb, he was in intensive care, but they've moved him out of there. So we've had a lot of people who just simply, the flu, I understand, is really on the rise. That's what I heard. So I got another flu shot Saturday. And I want to thank my physician for coming in to work on Saturday so I could have an appointment to see the doctor on Saturday morning. So it was very good. So I guess we're ready to move into our conversation. So thank you all very much. I look forward to it, and we can get going.
If I might start, Doug, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I'd like to, and I'm grateful that the congressman asked us to frame the conversation, because I think that we need to really rethink about the way we've been taught about what the problem is. And let me just start with the heart. We talk about heart disease, and we talk about heart disease being, and it's true, a leading cause of death in America. But I would submit this is that we need to think about things more from the things that actually cause it than that are part of the problem. And so when we think of heart disease, I don't think that we're doing the justice to people to say heart disease without a conversation about what that really means. And so when we're talking about things like heart attacks, and what have you. We're talking about a organ that is designed, called the heart, to pump blood 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to the entire body. And it does that by having a network of pipes or blood vessels that do that. And those pipes need to be open and free for that blood to go easily from every part of the body, from the top of our eyes to the tips of our toes. And the reason I bring this up, and I won't belabor the point, but I will say this, is that we call it heart disease, but the problem is not with the heart per se. That's the complication, is with the heart. The problem is in the blood vessels that feed the heart. And the blood vessels that feed the heart are damaged. The walls of them are damaged, starting with the process called inflammation. But what we also know, that there are dietary issues that actually create, along with that inflammation, blockages or blocks part of the blood flow in those blood vessels, so that the heart does not get what it needs to give the organ that it's feeding what it needs for it to do what it's supposed to do. And so we call that a heart attack, but that's talking about the disease from what the effect is, but not the cause. And I'm here to tell you that much of that cause we've known about, the American Heart Association, everybody talks about it. But obviously, there are major roles of movement or exercise and major roles for what we eat that contribute to the problem that creates the blockages in the heart. And much of that, we've talked about it, and many people are talking about it as it relates to certain amounts of certain foods that are fatty. And we'll get more into that, but I wanted to at least open with that and allow my colleagues to have an opportunity to add to or to react to those opening statements.
If I
Well,
might, let me respond to that in terms of suggesting that all of these different designations, you know, heart month, uh, breast cancer month, or week, uh, kidney month. I think the designations are designed to create awareness and education, information, and bringing attention to whatever the illness or disease might be. And then as we go into what can we do about it, and what do we do about it, that becomes the value of the designations, so that as people become aware, they then know that we might need more attention being given, or we might need more money to be appropriated, or we might need more individuals to become physicians so there can be more treatment. And so the designations really set the stage for what you just said in terms of let's be educated, or as educated as we can become, so that the designation has meaning and purpose, and we make use of it. So I love that descriptive analysis of what we do.
yeah, yeah, I'd like to pick up on some of the things that Dr. Mason said at first, very briefly, because I don't know enough as much as he does about inflammation. But it's a complex biological response to of the body to harmful stimuli such as infections, injury, or toxins. But he does talk about in the context of a lot of what's happening with us. Heart disease is one thing that you may see, but it really, there's really this role, and I think that's what implied in Dr. Mason, what Dr. Mason said, is there's this role of lifestyle and lifestyle choices and the choices you make in terms of the foods you eat, the amount of movement you're going to have in your life. I mean, what you're going to do in your life. So those play a role as well. And I did look up, and I want to share with you something from the National Institute of Health. And this gets specifically to heart health. They say heart healthy living involves understanding your risk, making healthy choices, and taking steps to reduce your chances of getting heart disease, including coronary heart disease, the most common type. By taking preventive measures, you can lower your risk of developing heart disease that could lead to a heart attack. And that's really one of the sweet spots of public health, trying to prevent these things moving forward, making sure that there's an environment such that where people live, where they can be healthy. And, you know, if you don't have access to healthy food, if there's a high crime rate, if there are a lot of problems going on in your community, you're much more likely to have problems in terms of getting access to healthy food, maybe getting kind of health care you need. And ultimately, those are the kinds of things that result in what we see in what they call health disparities, where some groups seem to be at a disadvantage in terms of having certain diseases. The other thing that really is interesting, that like cancer, and I know we're talking about heart disease, but cancer takes on its name by where the cancer occurs. But ultimately, it's all cancer. Heart disease is really a disease that is developed because of some problems in the circulatory system. And that's what Dr. Mason was talking about. That what the heart does, it pumps blood out to all the organs in the body. And if any of those areas in the body are denied blood, there's going to be a problem. And the blood vessels get smaller and smaller. So the further away they get from the heart, the smaller the blood vessels are, the more likelihood that they may burst or break, particularly if the pressure goes up or if they get hard. And you've heard of atherosclerosis and other things like that. So those are the kinds of things that really drive disease. And the things that we can do in our day-to-day lives to reduce our risk. And so I think that's what people need to remember and take home, that you have some degree of control over your health if you take some simple steps. And maybe we'll get into that later. But I'm going to stop and maybe throw it back to Doug, let him react.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Joseph, because that's kind of where I was thinking. And there are a lot of lifestyle choices that you can prevent heart disease or promote heart disease. And all of us have choices as to where we're going to live. For instance, if you don't exercise much and don't move much, you're going to increase your chance for heart disease. If you inhale combustible materials, no matter what you smoke, that's going to increase your chance of heart disease. If you have a diet that's rich in certain sugars and your blood sugar is always high, that can cause heart disease too. Also, if you're overweight, it's kind of like if you've ever taken a trip and you had to drag one suitcase, that's one amount of work. But if you have to drag a second or a third suitcase, you can see how much harder that is to move around. So there are all these things that we can do to minimize the effort that our heart has to make to circulate blood to the rest of our bodies. So we have those choices. And we're not just saying this because, well, I don't like potato chips or I don't like pizza or those other things. Because I've had that part of my life. I mean, you know, I've had the pizzas, I've had the beers, I've done those things, but I can tell you, in your work and healthcare environment, you can see what happened when you make the choices. And part of it is we have a chance to reverse some of the things that have happened earlier in life so that we can stay healthy longer. I think that's why the purpose of this forum.
Yeah. And even if you don't do those things earlier in life,
Yeah.
you can still reduce your risk by making some modifications in terms of what you do moving forward. And that's hard to do because a lot of these things people have developed, they're habits that people have developed over time. And again, where you live sometimes has a tremendous impact upon your health. And that's why some people do say that your zip code is more important than your genetic code in determining your health outcomes. Because the quality of life in your neighborhood, at least in terms of the housing stock, the access to healthy foods, the amount of violence, also can play a role moving forward. And I see Dr. Maya has joined us. And I don't know if she was listening before she joined us. I also don't know if she knows what we're talking about.
So, Dr.
Just
Maya,
completing my business for today, but glad to be here.
well, this is
Yeah,
heart
but
health.
we are talking about heart. I'll let Doug,
Yeah,
because he's leading.
this is Heart Healthy Month. And we're just talking about we're not going to be entering into a world of probably more anxiety because of somebody's decision about how to allocate resources. And so how this interacts with our hearts and heart disease is kind of the area that we're exploring tonight. So we're just talking about some of the things that we have control over, that we may be able to make conscious choices to keep our hearts healthy. So we've had a little bit of a discussion about food, about exercise, but Joseph has been really good about saying, well, sometimes it's where you live. If you live in an area where there's lots of violence, where you don't have access to healthy food, don't have access to pharmacies, there are all kinds of things that can contribute to it. And so we're just kind of exploring that whole landscape of what contributes to heart disease and what are the things that we can do to deal with it.
Yeah, and before Maya jumps in, because I know she's anxious to buy in, jump in, because she's an educator and a physician. I did take a look at this thing called anxiety, and I want to share some information, I think, because it was raised as a possible factor. And there's a close relationship between anxiety and heart disease. And I found this list about how anxiety increases heart disease risk. And I'll go through the list, and my esteemed colleagues who are actually doctors can address each of them. Stress hormones. Anxiety triggers the release of stress hormones. Unhealthy behaviors. We talked about that. People with anxiety may engage in unhealthy behavior. That's such as smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, and poor diet. It can cause disturbances in your sleep. You can't go to sleep at night, which can cause and increase inflammation, which Dr. Mason talked about. It can increase the risk of blood clots. And we talked about the importance of a healthy heart and how, we need to have a good blood flow. So the four things that I mentioned are stress hormones, unhealthy behaviors, sleep disturbances, and increased blood clotting. And maybe some of you that actually are doctors of medicine can address those.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Hello, Congressman. Thank you, Nikki, for putting this together. And thanks for letting me join late, everyone. And so, okay. So, I think you said the first one was stress hormones. So, stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, those are going to be what your body releases that cause you to have that break of sweat, cause you to have that extra burst of the way you smell when you sweat, things like that, the hair standing up on your neck and your arms and things like that. Those are your stress release, cortisol and adrenaline, right? How do they cause dysfunction? I am looking for a here I go. If this is my vein, my artery, this is where the blood travels, things like that. They cause it by stress, kind of makes little micro tears in the inside of it. Also, the chemicals cause the little tears. And when the tears start to heal over and over again, you get this dysfunction, almost like a buildup of cholesterol, right? You get the dysfunction, but you start to actually lose. Wait, can you see that? Lose. Is that getting smaller to y'all?
Yeah, narrower.
Yeah, narrow it. And it's not the actual vessel narrowing, it's the repeated scar tissue that kind of narrows it over time. Now, it doesn't narrow perfectly like a circle like I did it, but
Like a
if
clogged
you
drain.
imagine a scar right here, a scar right here, a scar right here, a scar right here, and the buildup of the scars over time, the vessel trying to heal itself. That's where endothelial function related to stress can come from. Now, speaking of endothelial function related to stress, Mr. Harrington mentioned sleep, right? When does the body heal from this endothelial or vessel function related to stress? When you sleep. But if you're not sleeping, it's not healing, right? What was the other one? You said four
Uh,
things.
One, and this is easy. It's unhealthy behaviors: smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, maybe drug consumption, poor diet. Those are things that we do have some degree. Well, anxiety will increase our desire to get away from things, and people may use substances to just block out all that noise and all that other stuff. And those substances are going to create problems.
And then, so yes, to get away from that, a coping mechanism, way to escape, a way to turn off that cortisol, that adrenaline, just for the time being, would be introduce alcohol, some other things to try to escape that, right? What happens when that alcohol lifts, so that other thing lifts, it's right back. And so one can end up using more and more because the body builds up a tolerance. So now I'm drinking one 8 ounce of 8 ounces of alcohol. That'll take care of it. Next month, I need 11 because the body is like, oh, that's nothing. It builds up a tolerance and it can lead to increased use of substances. And I think the fourth one you mentioned was clotting formation. So I probably should have tied that into the first two. So the first two with the cortisol and the adrenaline causing the vessels to change. And remember, your heart is a vessel too, right? Causing those scarrings and the buildup over time. The second part, not being able to heal from that scarring and buildup over time because we're not sleeping. The third one I should have put in there was the fact that scarring. So now I have my blood cell trying to get through this space, a little circle. I don't have anything, but let me make my vessel bigger. I have my circle blood cell trying to get through, and which is all one of them. Okay, so I have my platelets too trying to get through. Oops, I hit a bump, I hit a scar. Guess what platelets do? They're made to clot. So if they bump into too many things, they're gonna be like, okay, it must be time to form a clot. It must be time to mesh, right? So if I cut myself, right, and I'm bleeding out, why don't your skin ever bleed out? Because your body forms, the platelets come and they begin to form like a little mesh, scabs, right? If you think of scabs inside the body, things like that, they're still a little wet. Those are almost the same thing as clots, okay? And so if my platelet is going through and it hits a nick, it says, oops, it must be time to activate because I'm at a place where it's not smooth, right? So it's going to do what it does and it causes these clots. Now, what happens with clots? Now I have a flow, things coming through, and I got this little bubble clot. Sometimes it breaks off. It goes and blocks stuff in your leg, blocks stuff in your arms, in your lungs, and it can cause some really bad things. So those are parts of the physiological effects of stress that can lead to heart dysfunction and the sequelae. We call it a DVT, a deep vein thrombosis, or a pulmonary embolism. What happens and that doesn't necessarily, pulmonary embolisms happen in your lung, DVT happens in your vein, but they're all cardiovascular related. The vascular part, heavy on the vascular part. I hope I said it clear. I'm joining, trying to catch up. So I'll in my until next Mondays do a little quick summary and review of what I said.
Well, Maya, what people need to understand, we don't get this and then that. A lot of this stuff happens all together. And they're aggravated by other conditions that we had that you mentioned called high blood pressure. High blood pressure just means that the blood, when you measure the pressure in the blood, that it's in the veins and in the arteries, it's elevated. Well, that has some problems too. And when we look at that, particularly vis-a-vis what's happening in the small vessels throughout the body, especially like the ones in the kidney.
The
Mm-hmm.
arterioles and the venules.
Well,
That's
No, I mean in the arterioles, not the venules, in the arterioles.
Okay, arterials. Okay.
And so what I'm talking about is that we need to stop thinking that things just happen in certain parts and that's all. When
Hmm.
we get these problems in the blood vessels anywhere, we have it everywhere. Whether we have a symptom of it from the brain yet, or a symptom of it from having difficulty walking and getting pain in our legs when we walk, or whatever those things are, when that blood flow is down to the other level, that where you're not getting adequate flow. And I'll tell you, as a urologist, I spend a lot of my time dealing with men with erectile dysfunction. Why? Because that process that Dr. Maya just outlined, where you begin to block and clog up the arteries, are happening in the arteries all over the body. We need to not be thinking of these things as segmental things that just happen in one place. No,
Right.
if it happens in any set of arteries, it's happening in all of them, the ones that go everywhere in the body. So it's important that we begin to really think about those things that can help us. And a lot of that is, and all of you know, many of you know, I have a very big food bias because I believe food is 70% of the problem with the things that we're eating. And the medications that we get, those aren't medications that are going to erase those things. They may bring the blood pressure down, but they won't necessarily erase the blockage or the cartilage. And we need to explain to people what that means and how that then begins to translate itself with problems with our kidneys. Why do we have so many dialysis units all peppered throughout the Black community, particularly with these units that are made for dialysis? And I don't know the exact amount each of the chairs make for each person who goes and gets dialysis. The dialysis is necessary, so I think it's important, but I think that we need to understand why. And we need to look at, and we don't want to, but we don't want to look at things from a causal point of view. And we've got to look at the things that we're eating. And I'm a big fan, I'm not going to go on that soapbox too much tonight, but much of what we have would be ameliorated, obviously would be lessened by stress reduction, the things that some of my colleagues have mentioned already in terms of the things that we eat, and a lot of things that we eat, particularly those things that are not in their natural state but are manufactured or processed in some sort of way. Those things do cause inflammation. That inflammation is what helps to cause the problem with the blood vessels. So again, because I'll get on my soapbox and won't be able to get off. But there's some great movies out there that if you want to watch some things. There's and I'll give a few of those at before the end of the show.
But let me ask, what's the difference between high blood pressure and low blood pressure?
So each of those has its consequences. When your blood pressure is high, it's harder for your heart to move the blood around to other parts of the body. And there's certain sensitive parts of the body that are affected by it, like the small vessels in the eyes and in the kidneys. So there's an ideal blood pressure where the blood can circulate and you can take oxygen to the necessary places, the lungs, the eyes, the kidneys, the liver, and you can take the old used blood away in the right manner. So that helps you. When your blood pressure is low, all of your other organs are affected. You don't get enough blood to your brain, so you can't think, you can't see very well, your balance isn't very good. You get low blood pressure to your kidneys, they don't clear the poisons out of your system very well, don't make enough urine, that's a problem. You don't get enough blood to your gastrointestinal system, hard for you to absorb and digest your food. So your body has a particularly effective range where a high blood pressure can cause irreversible damage, and a low blood pressure makes it struggle to function effectively. It's kind of like driving your car when there isn't enough air in the tires. It just doesn't move and ride very well.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you can think about blood just the way you think about rivers and oceans and lakes and how the water moves back and forth. Because the real role of the blood, at least the red blood. The red blood cells get into the heart. They get a fresh supply of oxygen. They give off carbon dioxide, get a fresh oxygen. They get oxygenated, and they travel throughout the body. They're delivering nutrients. Those red blood cells, they're delivering nutrients and oxygen to all the parts of the body. And we talked about the smaller blood vessels. The further away from the heart they get, the smaller the blood vessels are. You got blood vessels throughout your hands and fingers. You got blood vessels in your brain. You got them in your heart. And so all of that needs on a daily basis a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients. The role of the blood vessels, not the veins, is to really take those waste products and get them back to the heart so they can again pick up this rich oxygen and nutrients and take it back to the body. Any interruption in that blood flow is going to cause problems. And one of the things was Maya was talking, she made me think about that the way they talk about high blood pressure a lot of times is they describe it as what happens with a water hose. If you open the hose wide open, you get a strong stream of water coming out. But if you narrow the opening of the hose, you'll get less water coming out. And if you close it too much, if you close it apart, nothing will come out. And therefore, whatever you were trying to do is not going to get any water. Same things happens with the circulatory system. If anything happens in that system at some point, if there's a burst, then something's going to open up, and whatever was supposed to get those nutrients won't get them. The body might heal itself, but there could be irreparable damage that's done as a result of that. So it's, the body is amazing in terms of what it can do, and we don't fully understand all the mechanisms, but we know when something goes wrong. Even patients know, because you'll have something bad happen. You go to a doctor, and a doctor, based upon the information we have, say, well, this is what you have, and may be able to tell you why it happened that way.
I'd like Maya, if you would. I'd like for us to just take a few minutes to talk about, because I mentioned it earlier, about these dialysis units peppered throughout our community. Now, the units themselves are not bad because they provide a place for people that need dialysis to be able to get it. But what causes the need for dialysis? Why is it that one needs a machine like this to help you function? And very simply, what happens is think of your screen door. Those of you can still remember screen doors. And you had screen doors in your house so that for example, in the summertime, you could leave the screen door open, and that allowed fresh air to come in and go out, but it kept other things out of the house. And what happens is, if the screen door, for whatever reasons, like when I was growing up, somebody threw a baseball or something like that, or leaned against the screen and tore the screen, then what would happen is that the screen now could not prevent some of these larger things from coming in because it's been torn or damaged. And those things, or it lets things, the screen in the body will let things come out of the body that should have stayed in there if the screen was working, so that it would provide the appropriate nutrients. Now, what I'm talking about with the screen situation very easily is we have high blood pressure, and the dynamic duo of killing those little filters in your kidneys are high blood pressure and diabetes. Mm-hmm. High blood pressure and diabetes begins to destroy your natural filters, to the point where now the screen is bigger. It's got bigger holes in it, and it's not only letting stuff out that shouldn't go out, but it's not keeping stuff in that should stay in. And so your kidney doesn't function, and somehow these things that need to be strained out of your blood aren't doing that. Just like if you have holes in your screen, you let bugs come in, and that's not good. So the idea, and I was going to ask Dr. Maya if she could, or Doug, to comment on how high blood pressure damages our screens and and damage continues to damage them to the point where they're not useful, and we need to what we then have called a transplant, a renal transplant, only to try to replace those damaged cells in the kidney.
Dr. Mason, before
And
Maya speaks, I just want to jump in real quick and talk about the value proposition.
Well, I'd like to,
If you
Joe,
think,
if you wouldn't mind, I'd like Maya to, because while people are thinking about what we just said, I'd rather have her just respond to that very quickly, and then we could go forward if you don't mind.
Okay. I'll make it quick because a lot of the stuff we've already said, right? So imagine the hose that Mr. Harrington talked about. I gotta use this flow to flow blood or water from the hose to the front and back door screen. Those are my two kidneys. The screens in this case are the kidneys. The hose the hose is the blood are the blood vessels. Now, if I have, and just like the heart has its own arteries, the kidneys or the screens have their own arteries. And actually, both, tying in what the congressman said, low and high blood pressure can cause it, because if I don't turn up, I gotta get that screen going. I gotta get the flow. I gotta get, because the kidneys are organs and they need to be filled with those nutrients that I think Mr. Harrington or Dr. Graham talked about, and in order to work, right? So I gotta get it. So I have to, low blood pressures, if I don't turn on that hose and the little flow is weak, I don't turn on that little knob, the little flow is weak, I'm not getting enough nutrients. And the kidneys are waiting for nutrients and waiting for nutrients and waiting for nutrients. And then that causes what we call ischemia. That's one form. You can get it from high too. Ischemia is when you have a lack of the nutrients you need, right? And they can be damaged that way. Alternatively, if the blood vessels are smaller because of the stress and high blood pressure, then I cannot get I can't push the nutrients and the blood through. That's another way you get the damaged kidneys and things like that. Now, also, distressed cortisol can damage the arteries and damage the kidneys. Other things can damage it, but if we're talking straight high blood pressure, I'm not getting enough nutrients to the arteries that feed the kidneys. The kidneys get damaged, and those tying back to diabetes. You got rampant sugar going, scarring everything, in your blood vessels, things like that, causing insulin problems. High blood pressure, you got other stuff lining it, or you have stress and your artery becomes kind of hardened, so it's not getting wide so you can get the flow through. It's just always this size, so you just are always eking it out, just trying to pump it, which causes backup, which causes problems with the kidneys. And so when the kidneys can't filter, they begin to hold in, like you said, Dr. Mason, those things that they're not supposed to hold in, let out things that they're not supposed to let out, but also have all kinds of mismatches of flow. Now, what can happen to the little tubules or the kidney processing pumps inside the kidneys is, because of the weight of all that stuff that's supposed to be cleared, and the kidneys are supposed to clear it per minute. If it's an assembly line, it's supposed to come, go. This goes here, this goes here, this goes here. Now, what happens if all of it gets overwhelming to the kidneys? The kidney is then lethargic and not functioning because it's so much at one time of the salts, of the water, things like that. That stress can also damage the little workers. Stress on the workers called the tubules inside of the kidney, and they over time just get tired. What happens to workers? If you put too much on them, too stressed, they get tired, they don't function right, and it's just a cycle. Now the tubules, the little individual workers, are not functioning right because they're overwhelmed, which they're functioning slower. So you have you have a decrease in filtration, meaning the kidney isn't clearing it, like you said, the spring isn't clearing it as fast, and it just topples on top of each other, and everything gets backed up. And that's how high blood pressure or any change in blood pressure can do it. Certainly, that's not the only thing, right? There can be autoimmune diseases like lupus and things like that that destroy structure. There can be diabetes, I've already mentioned, and a mass of other things. All of it has some tie. I'm not saying food is the cause of all of it. And certainly, there are things like lupus. Certain foods don't necessarily cause lupus, but they can certainly exacerbate it. So, ways to prevent and slow down that is making sure you're getting the right nutrients in, so your filters don't have to. Because what happens if I eat toxins? They have to get what filtered out my body. Who's doing the filtering? The kidneys and the liver, and I'm putting more stress now on my kidney and liver because I'm eating high fatty foods. It's got to try to clear the cholesterol. Got to try to clear the processed foods, the chemicals that they use to make ramen noodles stay fresh. My kidney has to clear that out, right? And if I'm already in a situation where I'm at high stress, it can be genetic, things like that, and I then put a lot of processed foods in it, and the kidneys have to clear, and the liver have to clear the chemicals in the processing out so it can extract the nutrients that are left. I'm putting more stress on it. I hope that answered the question.
Yes. I think that was a great explanation. Now, Mr. Harrington, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, I want to talk about what I'm calling the value proposition. I'm going to go back to a discussion we had early on, probably before we went live, and that was about the Super Bowl and the size of the line for the Philadelphia Eagles. And they said that the average height was 6'6", and the average weight was 338 pounds. That's unbelievable. But I was watching the game at my church, and somebody said William the Refrigerator Perry was only 300 pounds. But that's still a lot of weight. And so we're talking about this relationship between diabetes and high blood pressure and diet and whatnot. What's happened is, as the obesity levels have sort of exploded in this country, you see these problems. But there's a value proposition in this, in the sense that that's what's driving ultimately what we see is the dialysis centers in our community, because there is money in doing dialysis. And so I'm surprised at the proliferation, because there's probably a dialysis center, multiple dialysis centers in every Black and brown community in the United States. I mean, it's not just one, there are multiple. But that's because there's also an opportunity to start a business and make money and do something. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's a sign of what's happened.
And then to dovetail off of what you're saying, Mr. Harrington, if you really, y'all listening, if you really want to be surprised, look at the demographics who own the places that create that food in your neighborhood that's leading you to have the increased high blood pressure and diabetes. And then look at the people who own the dialysis centers. They're not typically the people that have to use, who buy the food there. They're not typically the culture that buys the food or the culture that uses the dialysis center. So just putting that there. Before Nikki gets me, I want to say hello to Audrey J. Cox. I want to say hello to Linda Johnson, Patricia Weber, Virginia Knight, Terry Johnson, Donna Roberts. I'm having trouble reading them. I'm leading to the side, y'all. V. Tally, Cornicki, hello, and Sean Kennedy says, good live discussion with individual information. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. That's all I see. Oh, nope, there's more, Nikki. Hold on, there's more, Nikki. Hello to Kim Jackson. Hello to Kim Jackson. Kim Jackson says, good evening, congressmen and doctors. All right. I'll hand it back to who's leading. Oh, and hello to Patrice Porter Rowland.
So I guess that's you, Doug.
Back to whoever's leading.
Is Doug tonight?
I think that Dr. Myers raised a very, very interesting point, because When you go to the grocery store or when you drive down the street, the things that are most easy for you to get to are probably the things that are the least healthy for you. If you go to the checkout counter at the grocery store, you got candy bars on one side and you got salty snacky chips on the other side. If you drive down the street, you've got half a dozen different fast food joints that are offering you meals that have high salt, high cholesterol, and high sugar contents. That's not by accident, unfortunately. There's been a lot of research that's been done that says, what are we going to do to get you to come back and buy more of the same? You know, they know when they make that Doritos, what flavors they're going to put in there to trigger your hormones so that you want more. They know when they give you that Arby's commercial, we got the meats. They got everything going for you to go there and have one, two, or three different sandwiches. Same with Subway footlongs. They know the colors, the tones, and the taste to have you going back for more. So it's not quite an accident that we're having this problem. There are remedies to it, but we're not ready for the remedies yet.
Yeah, that's some of their food science in terms of marketing.
Yeah,
And
that's
understanding
yeah.
what people want, and maybe not need, but what people want. And this I have no proof for it, but I think the things that really drive what people choose to eat, first thing is taste.
Yeah.
They want what they like and tastes good to them. The second is, how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah.
That's the second thing. And the third thing is, how close is it? How convenient it is. That drives a lot of our decisions in terms of what we eat, particularly when we're hungry. If you're out and you're hungry, you're going to look for something that's fast, something that's close, and something that you're familiar with. And that's likely not to be the most healthy thing that you eat that day.
I would add one more. It's also who's promoting the product. I don't think it's an accident that we're seeing people with high profiles in our society endorsing these products. If you want to be liked like them, successful like them, you want to have properties and talents like them, and I'd be really surprised if they consume as much of the product as they promote. I'd be surprised. So they know that if they put a celebrity as an endorser, we're more likely to be attracted to that product. So again, there are remedies to this. I just don't know if we're ready to address them yet. And I doubt that we're going to address them in the next 4 years. Doesn't seem like it.
Mm.
And I would agree that that's absolutely true, Doug.
Yeah.
That it's not going to happen. There's no value proposition that supports that.
Well,
The thing is, it's about, obviously we talk about health and we want people to be healthy and what have you, but that's not everybody's value proposition.
mhm,
There are many people who make a lot of money on disease,
mhm,
and they make that based because of some of the things that Mr. Harrington just mentioned a little while ago about what we like to eat. And we're all complicit in this whole situation. And if you look at that, you look at how many people cook at home. How many people, when I grew up, my mother always had a pot on the stove for us. We didn't eat. There was no such thing as going to one of the fast food joints to buy whatever was being sold there. So I'm just saying that it's a much bigger issue. It's going to take a lot more time than we have time on this show to talk about, at least for now. But we do need to think about, and I don't blame the victim, because what happens, we're victims, because these foods are being engineered to be able to do what's happening now. And there's a reason why there's salt in so much stuff. And there's a reason why there's sugar in so much stuff. And there's a reason why it's packaged the way it is and it tastes the way it tastes. None of that is by accident. Selling Sickness by Moynihan talks about that. And it's a great book. You should read it if you haven't read it yet. But it talks about the value of sickness in America, and that how much money is made by people because of being sick. And I'm not talking about necessarily going to the hospital, but obviously over-the-counter medications. And perhaps maybe I'll get that and have more conversation. But it's called Selling Sickness, written by Moynihan, not Moynihan.
I'm going to be brief because I know we're almost out of time. But you reminded me of a couple of things, Dr. Mason. One is in terms of food, they even measure the crunch how crunchy the food is, and it's got to have there's a science to how the crunch and how crunchy it has to be, before it goes and before it passed the test. And the other thing, I remember in talking about smoking and getting people to stop smoking. One of the things that really is interesting that people that smoke, and I remember because when I was young, I used to smoke, but I only smoked for about 2 years. That inhaling and just blowing out the smoke is relaxing because people watch the smoke come out of their breath, and all of a sudden they feel relaxed. They see the smoke in the air and they're quiet and they're calm. So on the one hand, it's calming them down. On the other hand, it's harming their lungs. So as Dr. Mason said, it's really ironic that some of these things that may give us a degree of pleasure over time will really cause major problems.
So I'm going to probably take the other side of Dr. Mason's argument. And in a segment of our society, we're concerned about how the consumption of fossil fuels has affected our weather, global warming. I think that we're going to arrive at the same tipping point. It's how the production and the distribution and sale of certain products is going to affect our health because, quite frankly, we don't have enough money to take care of all the problems. And if you don't take care of all the problems, you no longer have customers. It's kind of like if you don't rotate your crops, you're going to deplete the soil. That this science of food is going to deplete that customer base incredibly rapidly if it continues. So I think that I would start to work on that project to let them know that this particular product cycle is going to be shorter than they anticipate and that they'll need to shift into other products just for that reason. It's not going to do them any good to have a fast food place if everybody's in dialysis centers getting treated or in the hospital because of the complications of overeating.
Well, Doug, I would say, and very quickly, when I see television shows that sort of glorify, from one point of view, techniques for morbid obesity, where people are over 500 pounds, and the solution is to go have surgery. We can talk about that at another time, but it's misleading people. It's totally misleading people, and we need to talk about that.
Oh, I agree. I also think that the new drugs that are out there that help promote weight loss, they have advantages. They can also have disadvantages. It's a stepping stone, but it doesn't seem like the ultimate path to the future.
As long as money can be made off misery, there'll be misery.
Well said.
All right, and then before Nikki, Nikki, I'm on it. I want to say hello to the Core Center. I want to say hello to Loretto Women's Center. I want to say hello to Alderman Pat Dowell and Commissioner Terry Steele, Evangelist Terry Johnson. Let me make sure. Oh, Loyola Hospital Women's Center. And Deborah from Coleman's Barbecue. I want to say hello to you all. And I think I said this, but Patrice Porter Rowland. Thank you so much. I wanted to get those in because I don't want Nikki to come back and say we didn't say hello to her people. We definitely appreciate you joining us and all your comments.
And so Nikki's asked me to perform one other task and to remind everybody that this Sunday between 1 and 3, there's going to be a Wear Red Today at Loretto Hospital on Central Avenue in Chicago. And some of the doctors that are on the show and some other doctors who's been on the show are going to talk about your heart and heart health. So I'd just like to let everyone know, it's in the audience, that this is something that's been sponsored by the Congressman. There'll be a number of really good speakers. And it's a good way to learn more about the topic we talked about tonight. So unfortunately, it does look like we're running near the end of our hour. And so I'm wondering if each of us has something to think about for next week. For myself, and I agree with the Congressman that we're going to be experiencing more anxiety as the present administration does what it's intending on doing. My thought about that is, if we know that turning to certain foods and certain beverages are going to make ourselves worse, we need to prepare. Like when you see that car slowing down in front of you, you want to slow down too. If we know that we're going to be facing more anxiety, we have to work at having alternatives and not look for the bag of chips, not look for the Coke, not look for the 6-pack of alcohol, or the things that we've usually used to take care of our anxiety, because we'll have more to deal with, and turning in that direction is not going to help us for the future.
I'll go with mine until next Monday. Just to summarize how anxiety or ways anxiety play into that, they do increase your blood pressure. You know, it does increase your blood pressure, which creates that problem flowing to your organs, including your filters, which are your kidneys. But also, it causes scarring of the lining of your blood vessels, making it a bumpy road for blood cells, oxygen, whatever, but also platelets, which increase your tendency to have clots. Okay, and it's harder to heal because then you can't sleep, and that's when the blood vessels heal. Okay, and I do want to say there is hope though. So one thing we talked about during COVID and other places, being proactive. And what might that look like right now? If I'm anticipating that I'm going to have anxiety, things like that, or I see through history it happens, whether I think it's going to happen to me or not, a good plan is to find your tribe, find your healthcare giver that you're going to have a place to deal with your emotional, mental, behavioral health, whatever you want to call it. You know, get that now, because you don't want to be looking for it when the emotions are high, when the anxiety is high. Get in place. Get your weekly, monthly, whatever the visit is. Get that going now, so you already have a place. That way, when anxiety slaps me in the face, I'm like, oh, I got somewhere I'm gonna put that. I'm gonna put it on Tuesday. I'm gonna put it every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Hello, Dr. Erin Alexander, great psychologist. Trust me. You know, I know she's gonna be like, why are you saying that? But I have somewhere to put it. So when stuff try to get me, I'm like, I got somewhere to put it. So be proactive. Check in on your strong friends, because it's the strong friends, our community leaders and things like that sit and they were like, it's gonna be okay. But they also need us to say it's okay. But then also, if you want to do something about it, right? So that's things you can do for your self-care. But look, a couple of things. You vote every day with your dollar. It's not every 4 years. You vote every day with your dollar. Okay? And if you one of those people that didn't register but wish you registered, voters registration occurs all the time. So you don't have to wait till 6 months and do a drive. You know what I'm saying? You can register to vote and be prepared, right? Because in 2 years, in some places quicker than 2 years, but definitely in 2 years, there's some opportunity there. Let me just say that, leave it there. Think about it until next Monday.
Well, Dr. Harrington, Joseph, you're
I'm going to
muted.
go and I'm going to try to be brief. I got two things. One, flu is on the increase. It's still flu season. That's the public health side in me. And also, flu deaths have now surpassed COVID deaths for the same period. So it's not too late to get a flu shot. And we want to remind people about that. But one of the things that I've been sharing with people, and I think I'm going to share it tonight, and we've been talking about anxiety, is remind people of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you, Joseph. Dr. Mason.
I would just ask that everybody think about what you've heard tonight and think about how much or how little it applies to you. And if there's some things that apply to you that, based on the conversation tonight, are things that could make your life better, could make your kidneys last longer, to make your heart last longer, then think about doing those things. And think about it not for anybody else, but for you. Because no matter if you're thinking about it for your wife, your spouse, or your husband, or your child, or what have you, at the end of the day, it's got to be for you, because you're worth it.
Congressman Davis.
Well, you know, the longer I live, the more I want to keep living. And so I was trying to think, how effective are the substitutes? I think it may have been you, Joe, who indicated when we started that people eat what they like. I mean, that's one thing that they do. And so I'm wondering how effective are the substitutes that are being used for sugar, that are being used as an alternative to sodium or salt, and other things that we might also like the taste of. I'm thinking of myself. I think I've reached the point where I can actually do totally without sugar. But I'm wondering if the stuff that I use is doing what I'm hoping it will do as an alternative. And so maybe we'll have a discussion one night about those alternatives and how well they are working. And somebody might create something else that does just as well. And we can help people eliminate the use of some of these things that we know are harmful. And so I'd love to hear that discussion at one point. Beyond that, let me thank everybody for being with us. I did not get anxious during the football game because after the first quarter, I pretty much concluded that I didn't need to watch the rest of it. And so I went on about my business and started doing something else. Great discussion, tremendous insights, good information. Until next week, 7 days, and we hope to see you all then.
Good night.
Have a good night. Thank you.